Mr. President,
The senator from Nevada.
are we in a quorum call?
No.
Thank you. Mr. President, I rise today to speak on an issue that will affect millions of hard-working families, seniors, children, veterans, and any American who relies on essential services. As we'll soon see, Republicans are going to use the budget reconciliation process, a tool that was originally designed to help rein in wasteful spending and lower the national debt, to pass massive new tax cuts for billionaires and the ultra-wealthy. And to pay for these tax breaks, they're proposing devastating cuts to vital programs that people in my state of Nevada rely on, including Medicaid, SNAP, supplemental programs for women, infant, and children. So let me say that again. Congressional Republicans are going to cut critical government programs like Medicaid and SNAP in order to give the wealthiest Americans even more tax cuts. You got that right. Their policies are, well, billionaires win and families lose. This isn't fiscal responsibility, it's moral negligence. This isn't just about economic policy. This is about the livelihoods of everyday Americans. At a time when Nevadans are already grappling with economic hardship and a rising cost of living, these actions by my Republican colleagues, well, they're just plain wrong. They're just out of step. Instead of using this budget process to provide relief for hardworking families, well, Republicans, they're exploiting it to push through policies that benefit billionaires like Elon Musk while leaving millions of Americans, I'll say everyday hardworking families, regular people, everyday people, leaving them all behind, leaving you in the lurch. Again, their motto seems to be billionaires win, families lose. And let's remember when Senate Democrats, what we did with the budget process when we were in the majority. Anybody remember? Well, we gave Medicare the power to negotiate for lower prescription drug prices. We capped the cost of insulin at $35 a month. We helped hardworking Americans who were being crushed by high costs. We stood up to corporate interests on behalf of the middle class. And now, well, my colleagues, Republicans, are in the majority. What do they want to do? Well, again, billionaires win, families lose. They want to give additional billions in tax breaks for the wealthiest Americans while the rest of us are footing the damn bill. The numbers tell the story. Extending these tax cuts would give the top 1% of earners, those making roughly $750,000 a year or more, a tax cut averaging more than $60,000 a year. And I'm going to put that in perspective for a moment. The tax cut that the top 1% would get is more than the total income of most families who rely on Medicare or SNAP, or just most families in general. It's the top 1%. And the two programs Republicans are planning to cut, Medicare and SNAP, they're going to cut them in order to pay for tax cuts, trillions of dollars. Again, for who? Elon Musk and their billionaire buddies. So you heard that right. These expanded tax cuts will cost the federal government $4.2 trillion. So you might be asking yourself, wait, so how are Republicans, well, how are they going to pay for all this? Well, in order to help offset some of that cost, they're going to decrease funding for Medicaid, for SNAP, and other services that support people with disabilities and elderly individuals. Medicaid alone provides health coverage to almost 80 million Americans, including children, seniors, and people with disabilities, like I said. And these cuts, well, they would directly harm some of the most vulnerable people in our society, making it harder and harder for them to get the kind of life-saving care, or just any care that they may need. In my state of Nevada, more than 800,000 people rely on Medicaid for their health care. 800,000. And any reduction in its funding would leave these individuals, some of them our friends, our neighbors, they go to church with us. Any reduction in funding is going to leave these individuals without access to affordable health care or the ability to see a doctor. Similarly, SNAP is a lifeline for millions of families seeking to feed their children. Just feed their children. It feeds our seniors. It helps our working parents. And it's estimated that more than 40 million people rely on SNAP just to put food on the table. Nearly 1 in 6 people in Nevada benefited from SNAP last year, the majority of whom are children. You got that right. 1 in 6 people benefit from SNAP in Nevada. Majority of them are children. So we're talking about parents who rely on this program to make sure that their kids don't go to bed hungry or that they have breakfast before they go to school. They're feeding hungry kids. But Republicans are proposing cuts to SNAP that would affect millions of families, driving up food insecurity, placing an additional burden on those who can least afford it. And on top of these cuts, you have to consider the cuts that the Trump administration has already made. Actions that are hurting veteran services, health care, and good-paying jobs, rebuilding our infrastructure. The Trump administration has already made cuts to the staff at the Department of Veterans Affairs, including the people that staff the Veterans Assistance Hotline. These cuts are going to have a severe impact to our veterans. They served our country with honor. They deserve the best possible care when they return home, and cutting doctors and nurses and counselors and people who answer the helpline, how is that helping those who protected us, who keep our homeland safe? We owe them that. Well, these cuts aren't showing that at all. And the administration has also targeted Medicare for staffing cuts that could undermine health care access for seniors across the country. Nearly 1 in 5 seniors depend on Medicare for their health care needs, and for many, it's their only source of care. Letting go of Medicare employees will impact seniors' ability to access this literal lifeline. We've also seen attacks from the Trump administration on job-creating infrastructure projects, like those authorized in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. These projects, well, what I want to tell you is that they support good-paying American jobs, good-paying jobs in construction and engineering and in public works. They fix our roads and our bridges and our trains, our grid. It matters. They build the rail systems that help connect our communities. These are American jobs on American roads and American rail and American bridges. We should be keeping these jobs and investing in our infrastructure. These are the folks that help modernize our airports. And I can tell you, in my state of Nevada, they support our travel and tourism jobs. Top industry for us. These jobs, in modernizing our airports and our infrastructure, they help everyone across this country, every American. American jobs in America for Americans. We should be investing in our infrastructure. And the cuts made by the Trump administration means that projects all over the country are in limbo. They're going to delay projects, they're going to cost jobs, and it's going to make it harder to rebuild our nation's infrastructure. And in Nevada, we know how important infrastructure investments are to keeping our economy moving, our communities safe. We're talking about jeopardizing projects to build new solar energy installations and even expanding access to high-speed internet. And for us, that's nearly $500 million worth of federal funding that's been allocated for Nevada to connect rural communities across our state to just reliable internet. And the loss of funding for projects like this one just doesn't stop at people accessing the internet. It'll hurt people who are counting on the jobs this project would create, particularly in our rural communities. The numbers here are staggering, and the impact is undeniable. We're talking about cuts that have the potential to impact millions of people, people who are working hard every day to make ends meet, to provide for their families, and to ensure that they can live with dignity. These existing cuts, coupled with the Republicans' proposed budget cuts, it's just going to be devastating for American families. And the fact that these cuts are being made to give billionaires even more tax breaks, well, it's unconscionable. The American people deserve better. They deserve a government that works for them, that works for our families, not for the ultra-wealthy. And at the end of the day, Mr. President, Republicans have to decide who they're fighting for. Because right now, with this budget proposal, they're fighting for billionaires and the largest corporations who've already benefited from their 2017 tax cuts. We cannot and we must not turn our backs on the American people. We cannot allow billionaires to get richer on the backs of everyday Americans. We cannot let the motto be for this administration, billionaires win and families lose, because families are the backbone of America. Families are the backbone of America, and they deserve respect and attention. And we cannot allow the billionaires to break their backs. So I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to come together and put the American people first, people over billionaires. Let's work together to strengthen our economy, protect our vital programs, ensure that everyone, regardless of their wealth or status, has an equal opportunity to succeed. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President. Mr.
Majority
President.
Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent that the Foreign Relations Committee be discharged from further consideration, and the Senate now proceed to S-Res 53.
The clerk will report.
S-Res 53, recognizing the 80th anniversary of the amphibious landing on the Japanese island of Iwo Jima during World War II and so forth.
Is there objections to proceeding with the measure? Without objection, the committee is discharged. The Senate will proceed.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to immediate consideration of S-Con Res 11, which was received from the House. I'm sorry, H-Con Res 11.
The clerk will report.
H-Con Res 11, providing for a joint session of Congress to receive a message from the President.
Is there objection to proceeding with the measure? Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate stand adjourned under the previous order. That's what it says. Scratch that last unanimous
Majority
consent
Leader.
request. I ask unanimous consent that the Senate now proceed to the en-bloc consideration of the following Senate resolutions which were submitted earlier today. S-Res 84 and S-Res 85.
Is there objections to proceeding with the measures en bloc? Without objection, the Senate will proceed en bloc.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the resolutions be agreed to, the preambles be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, all en bloc.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it stand adjourned until 10 a.m. on Thursday, February 20th, that following the prayer and pledge, the journal of proceedings be approved today, the morning hour be deemed expired, and the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day. Morning business be closed, and the Senate resume consideration of calendar number 13, S-Con Res 7. Further, that all time during adjournment count equally towards calendar number 13, S-Con Res 7, and that if any nominations are confirmed during Thursday's session, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, and the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, for the information of all senators, senators should expect a cloture vote on the Patel nomination at 11 a.m. tomorrow, followed by a confirmation vote at approximately 1:45 p.m. If there is no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it stand adjourned under the previous order following the remarks of my colleagues.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Mr. President,
Later. The senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, I rise in opposition to our Republican colleagues' budget proposal. This plan is all about giving tax cuts to billionaires and then finding the money to pay for it. Let's make that really clear. This week, they are moving forward in both the House and the Senate with their plans. While the plans are different, the destination is the same. The results of this, when you look at the details with the House bill, with the Senate bill, when you look at the undermining of the Affordable Care Act, which has given health care to so many people, and you look at the undermining in the House proposal of the prescription drug negotiations for Medicare, which is so key, when you look at what would happen to rural hospitals, what would happen with nutrition for kids and veterans, infrastructure projects are subject right now, all to find this over $2 trillion for tax cuts for the wealthy. It is no wonder that 2/3 of Americans, and this is in a number of public polls, think the president isn't focused enough on lowering costs. And no wonder they believe by a 13-point margin that these policies will actually increase inflation. Costs are high. Americans are struggling to make ends meet. They actually thought that this administration would come in and do something about it. And my concern, which you will hear from me, from many of my colleagues, that this budget proposal will only make things worse. Over the last few years, our workers and businesses have created millions of good-paying jobs. And just a few years ago, we came together to pass the bipartisan infrastructure law, which has made historic investments in our roads, ports, bridges, high-speed internet, and more. I remember how proud we were, those of us that worked on this legislation, that we had such strong bipartisan for this bill. But unfortunately, these proposals from the Senate and the House would undo this progress, particularly when it comes to broadband. In 2025, we can't talk about infrastructure without talking about broadband. High-speed internet is necessary for everything from education to healthcare to finding jobs, not to mention keeping in touch with family members. I have a number of small businesses that when they don't have high-speed broadband, they actually have to go into town to a McDonald's parking lot to contact their customers, because in this modern day, you cannot do business, even in the smallest of towns, without having high-speed internet. Right now, more than 20 million Americans are left out because they still don't have a reliable internet connection at home. As co-chair of the bipartisan Senate Broadband Caucus and the author of the original bill that got included in the bipartisan infrastructure law, I've always believed that if they can have high-speed internet in a country like Iceland, a country with active volcanoes that are spewing lava, maybe, just maybe, we can get it in every corner in our own country. That's why we fought to make sure the bipartisan infrastructure law included historic funding to deliver high-speed internet. That funding's there, it's going out, It has been going out. It will go out in the future. I would love if it had just all happened in 1 year, but that funding is going out. But that progress is going to be ground to a halt if this money instead goes to tax cuts for the wealthy. Slashing funding for infrastructure and high-speed internet is only the beginning. The budget also threatens health care for over 8 million seniors and more than 31 million kids. On top of that, it would force rural hospitals to shut their doors, and it would threaten the future of Medicare drug price negotiations, which I noted earlier. Even the first 10 drugs under our bill, the first 10 drugs alone, and no one has disputed this because of the 60% decrease after the negotiations with the pharma companies, 70% decrease on those 10 drugs, would save seniors in out-of-pocket $1.5 billion in just 10 years. Pharma got a sweetheart deal 20-some years ago. I wasn't here when that happened, but it is time to change it. We did. The first 10 drugs came out. Now this administration has been handed the torch to handle the 15 drugs that need to be next negotiated. After that, they pick 15 more, and hopefully these are all blockbuster drugs. But if this is undermined, as happened in the House bill, in a sop to pharmaceutical companies, but if this is undermined, so much money will be left on the table and go to the rich people instead of the consumers who need those less expensive drugs. We should not be paying twice as much as other industrialized nations for pharmaceuticals in this country, where so much taxpayer money already went into research and development. Unfortunately, under our budget that we are getting proposed here by Republicans in the Senate and the House, seniors won't be the only ones forced to rely on food banks. Republicans are planning to make sweeping cuts to programs that millions of Americans rely on for nutritious food. Addressing hunger shouldn't be a red issue or a blue issue. It should be an American issue. In fact, this body has often worked across the aisle to improve nutrition programs. While grocery prices continue to increase, seniors, children, and veterans should not be left hungry to pay for tax cuts for billionaires. This is making it harder and harder for Americans to put dinner on the table. In fact, we found out that due to Elon Musk's activities, that I guess several avian flu experts, people working on the front line, were accidentally fired. While the prices of eggs have been going up sky high, these people were removed from their jobs. They are now fast-tracking a rehiring of these employees, saying that it was an accidental mistake. We really can't afford accidental mistakes for watching the nuclear stockpile or trying to solve this problem of avian flu anymore. We have to actually help people instead of increasing their costs or their risk when it comes to safety. The budget slashes funding that Americans across the country rely on to pay their mortgages and makes it harder, the House bill, for them to afford flood insurance. This will make life harder, not to mention more expensive, for the Minnesotans whose homes were flooded over the summer, for people in Kentucky who are facing deadly flooding as we speak, and countless other Americans. These proposals, cuts to housing, healthcare, infrastructure, they have one important thing in common. None of it is going to lower the cost for the American people. It's going to increase their costs, all to give trillions of dollars of tax cuts to the wealthy. I have no problem bringing the cost down for people making under $400,000 a year, which is the vast majority of my constituents. I have no problem with keeping those tax cuts in place, but that is not what we're talking about when we look at this major, major overreach and expansion. I don't remember Republicans campaigning on higher costs and higher debt, but that is exactly what's going to happen if these budgets pass. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
The Senator from Michigan.
thank you. I rise today in opposition to the budget resolution that we've been discussing here tonight. I'm a new senator from the great state of Michigan. I'm a former CIA officer and Pentagon official. I did 3 tours in Iraq alongside the military, and I've worked very proudly for both Democratic and Republican administrations. So I come to this job thinking about security quite a bit. I really understand my job as one where I'm meant to protect the physical security of my constituents and the economic security of my constituents. And what I mean by that, when I think about that, is first on physical security. You can't do anything if you're not safe in your home, in your neighborhoods, in your country. And then your economic security, number 2, is being able to live the American dream that all of us grew up on, that you could work 40 hours a week, one job with good benefits, you could do well and your kids could do better. But I rise today to defend that security because I think it's under threat. We know that the majority is crawling all over the federal government looking for $6 trillion in cuts, right? They've been open about that. That's not a hidden thing. They are looking for $6 trillion in every couch cushion they can find because they are preparing a major tax bill with all kinds of tax giveaways to the wealthiest Americans. And in that process, they have put us on a dangerous path with this budget resolution. It adds billions to our national debt. So let's dispense with the idea that the Republicans are deeply concerned about our national debt. You cannot say that and in the same breath support this proposal. And then in addition, it guts programs that we all rely on, again, for our physical and economic security, with no regard for those two things. Of course, this does nothing to get at the things that President Trump said he was running on, right? He ran very loudly on lowering costs for the average Americans, making things easier to manage. There is no connection between this search for $6 trillion and lower prices for the average person. Now, there are a lot of things that are at risk of being cut that are deeply connected to Michiganders' well-being. Let me start off by saying things very sort of parochial to the Great Lakes, and that's the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, something called the GLRI. Michiganders understand our national heritage, our state heritage is our Great Lakes, our waters, and our water. The GLRI is the big fund that both Democrats and Republicans have supported year after year, championed by the woman I represented, or I'm replacing, Senator Debbie Stabenow, to keep our water clean, our water safe, and support, again, Michigan's economy, our tourism, our economic security. 3 out of the 4 years that Donald Trump was in the White House previously, he cut the entirety of the GLRI. So all the money for invasive species, all the money to keep out our algae blooms, all the money to keep our drinking water safe, to help deal with transportation in the Sioux Locks in Michigan. And every year we push that back. You better believe that in their search and hunt for that $6 trillion, they are going to again target the very thing that keeps our Great Lakes safe and secure. The Gordie Howe Bridge. We are about to open up the largest commercial border bridge in the history of our country. It's named after Gordie Howe, who was a Canadian hockey player who played for the Red Wings. The Canadians have paid for this bridge. It is set to open in September because our current bridges and tunnels cannot handle the sheer volume of traffic going across the bridges and tunnels every day. How are we going to staff that if we're sending federal workers home? How are we going to support that bridge, which will allow you to drive from Montreal to Miami without stopping for a single street light, if we can't support hiring of new federal workers and we're sending our federal workers home? Border security is obviously a priority, especially for a border state. But how do we do that without throwing the baby out with the bathwater? And then we have things that have been affecting Michigan now for the past year plus, bird flu, right? Avian flu. We've got geese now showing up dead all over the state of Michigan. We see the bird flu transiting between species. That is never a good sign. That means it's mutating, it's changing, it's getting stronger, and egg prices as a consequence are the highest ever in American history. But instead of dealing with that problem head on, as a responsible administration would, they are cutting people who are working on avian flu, monitoring, who are helping to understand how we prevent the spread of yet another biohazard. And the people who are doing that are getting pink slips. The administration has now terminated people just, again, to rehire them. Can you imagine the morale of our federal workers who are supposed to be keeping us safe right now? And then we have our primary industry in Michigan, which is the auto industry. The automotive industry is our heritage as well. It's fundamental to our state economy, and my priority, my job as a senator in this state is to make sure that the auto industry, the tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers, that continues to be the basis for a strong middle class, the foundation for a strong middle class in Michigan. What deeply worries me right now is we've got unelected billionaires who are monkeying around with our industry, our principal industry in the state of Michigan. Mr. Musk, it has to be said, runs a competitor to the Michigan-based auto industry. And he is right now actively welcoming and championing Chinese interests into our supply chains. Just recently, he has made clear that he is deeply interested in moving all his operations, all the things he's got going on in Shanghai, to Mexico. He wants to create an easier backdoor for those Chinese companies to supply him, to supply other autos, to build those cheap vehicles, and then use NAFTA to bring them into the United States easily. His interests and the interests of everyone who works for an American auto company do not align. He is interested in enriching himself, in strengthening his own supply chain. He does not care about the threat to our national security, and he certainly doesn't care about a threat to economic security in the state of Michigan. I think this is an important thing to highlight as we think about this budget resolution that's been presented to us. This budget resolution is an attempt to get President Trump what he wants so that he can do unfettered and hidden away from the American people whatever he wants with our physical security and our economic security. It is something that I think many of us feel is being jammed through. Now, it's hard to understand what's happening. There's chaos among the Republicans. The president says he wants one bill. The House says they want one bill. The Republicans here say they want two bills. It's unclear what exactly is happening. They're trying to figure it out. But in the meantime, all we can do here is defend our economic and physical security. That is our job. My fear is that past is prologue. The administration's approach is going to be reflected in this budget, and American citizens are going to find out months later about the cuts to programs they care about, to things that Michiganders depend on, and I believe that's the wrong approach. So thank you, Mr. President. I yield back.